"So you quit racing because of him?" I asked, trying to process this new version of my wife's history. Dana's laugh was bitter. "I didn't quit, Clay. I was blacklisted. Lawrence made sure that no major team would hire me, spread rumors about my professionalism, questioned my technical reports, even suggested that my lap times were somehow inflated or inaccurate. Within 6 months, I went from being one of the most sought-after test drivers in the sport to being persona non grata in racing circles." She stood up and walked over to the Corvette, running her hand along its pristine red paint. "I moved away, changed careers, tried to build a normal life, but I never forgot what he took from me." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with startling clarity. "You knew he lived here when we moved to Silverwood Crossing," I said, and it wasn't a question. Dana nodded, that patient, calculating expression I'd been seeing more and more often crossing her face. "I've been keeping tabs on Lawrence Parker for 10 years, Clay. When I found out he'd moved here and was running the HOA like his personal kingdom, I knew it was time for a reckoning." She gestured toward the Corvette sitting in our driveway. "This car's bait, honey. I've been waiting to see how long it would take him to make his move, and judging by the compliance notices and his son's sudden interest in borrowing it, I'd say we're right on schedule." Standing there in our garage, surrounded by the evidence of my wife's secret past, I realized that our move to Silverwood Crossing hadn't been about finding a quiet place to settle down at all. Dana had been planning something from the beginning, and I'd been completely oblivious to it. "What exactly are you planning to do?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Dana walked over to a workbench and picked up a tablet that was displaying what looked like a dashboard with subscriber counts and engagement metrics. "Remember that online channel I mentioned? It's called Spot the Racing Fraud, and it has about 50,000 people who are very interested in seeing fake automotive experts get exposed." Her smile was sharp as a blade as she continued. "I've been building an audience for 3 years, Clay. People who've been scammed by mechanics, hurt by reckless drivers, or financially damaged by people who claimed racing expertise they didn't have. They're all waiting to see justice served, and Lawrence Parker just volunteered to be our next case study." She showed me the tablet screen, which displayed comments from viewers, asking when the next fraud exposure would be posted. "I'm going to remind Lawrence Parker what happens when you mess with Lightning Dana Morrison, and I'm going to make sure 50,000 people get to watch it happen in real time. And after that, he'll never forget it." The phone call came 2 days later, and I could tell from Chad's tone that he thought he was delivering an ultimatum rather than making a request. "Look, Mr. Morrison," he said, his teenage voice trying to sound authoritative, "I'm going to give you one last chance to be reasonable about the car situation. My dad's got another compliance hearing scheduled for next week, and it would be a shame if things had to escalate further." There was a pause before he added, "All I'm asking for is one spin around the lake. 30 minutes, tops. Surely that's not too much to ask between neighbors?" To my complete amazement, Dana took the phone from me and said, "You know what, Chad? You're absolutely right. Come by tomorrow afternoon around 4, and you can take the car for a drive around the lake." I started to protest, convinced my wife had lost her mind, but she held up a hand to silence me, while Chad's excited voice chattered through the speaker about how this was going to be totally awesome and how he knew we'd come around eventually. After she hung up, I waited for an explanation, but Dana just smiled and said, "Trust me, honey, everything's going according to plan." That evening, Dana disappeared into the garage for several hours, and when she finally emerged, she was wiping her hands on a shop rag and looking remarkably satisfied with herself. "What have you been doing out there?" I asked, but she just winked and said I'd find out tomorrow. The next morning revealed the extent of her preparations. Hidden throughout the Corvette were tiny cameras that she explained would live stream everything to her anonymous online channel called Spot the Racing Fraud, which apparently already had 50,000 subscribers waiting for exactly this kind of content. The car now has speed monitoring equipment, the same kind racing teams use to catch inexperienced drivers, Dana explained as she showed me various additions to the vehicle that were nearly invisible unless you knew what to look for. There's also an emergency brake system that can be activated remotely if things get dangerous, and I've programmed the sound system with some special voice commands that will activate if the car detects reckless driving. She demonstrated by starting the engine and immediately flooring the gas pedal while parked. A computerized voice immediately announced, "Easy there, Speed Racer, this ain't Mario Kart." While Dana was turning the Corvette into a high-tech trap, I learned more about her online presence and the community she'd built around exposing automotive fraud and incompetence. Her Spot the Racing Fraud channel had been documenting fake racing credentials, dangerous driving instructors, and people who misrepresented their automotive expertise for 3 years. The comment sections were filled with stories from viewers who'd been scammed by unqualified mechanics, hurt by reckless drivers, or financially damaged by people who claimed racing expertise they didn't possess. What I found most interesting was that Dana had been subtly promoting the channel throughout our neighborhood, and several residents had already subscribed after hearing her mention it during casual conversations about car maintenance and local automotive services. Dana had also recruited Blake Stanton, a 16-year-old tech genius from 3 streets over who had his own grudge against the HOA and had been following Dana's channel since its early days. Blake had been watching her content and learning about automotive safety and fraud detection, which made him the perfect ally for what Dana was planning. His amateur video effects skills were impressive, and he'd volunteered to film Chad's driving test from multiple angles while providing real-time technical analysis of what was happening. The kid's got serious talent, Dana told me, as she showed me some of Blake's previous work, and he's been documenting HOA overreach for months through something called the Spot the Fraud HOA social media group. My regular viewers are going to love seeing automotive fraud and HOA corruption exposed in the same video. The plan, as Dana explained it, was elegantly simple. Chad would be allowed to drive the Corvette exactly as he'd requested, but everything would be recorded and broadcast live to an audience that knew exactly what to look for. This car has over 400 horsepower and was built when safety meant wearing a seatbelt, Dana said. If Chad actually knows how to handle a vehicle like this, he'll have a nice drive and everyone goes home happy. But if he's just another overconfident teenager who thinks power equals skill, she let the sentence hang in the air. But her smile said everything. As 4 o'clock approached, I found myself getting nervous about the whole plan. What if something actually goes wrong? I asked Dana as we watched Chad swagger up our driveway with the confidence of someone who'd never met a problem he couldn't charm his way out of. What if he actually gets hurt? Dana's expression grew serious for a moment. Clay, I'm not trying to hurt that kid. I'm trying to teach him and his father a lesson about respect and consequences. The car has more safety features now than it did when it left the factory, and I'll be monitoring everything in real time. If he drives responsibly, nothing bad happens. If he doesn't, she gestured toward the live stream setup that Blake was finalizing across the street, well, then he gets to learn that actions have consequences. Chad's knock on the door was confident, almost aggressive, and when Dana handed him the keys, his grin was so wide it looked painful. Thanks for being cool about this, Mrs. Morrison, he said, already heading toward the car. I promise I'll take good care of her. As he slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, Dana pulled out her phone to monitor the live stream. 847 people were already watching, and the viewer count was climbing rapidly. Showtime, she murmured, and I realized that tomorrow everyone in Silverwood Crossing was going to know exactly what kind of driver Chad Parker really was. Chad accepted the keys with a kind of cocky grin that immediately made me want to reconsider the whole plan, but Dana just watched calmly as he slid into the driver's seat like he'd been born to drive vintage American muscle cars. The engine roared to life with that distinctive rumble that only comes from a properly tuned V8, and for a moment Chad just sat there revving it, clearly savoring what he thought was his moment of triumph. Remember, Dana called out sweetly, just a nice, easy cruise around the lake, nothing fancy. Chad gave her a thumbs up and pulled out of our driveway with all the confidence of someone who'd never met a problem he couldn't handle. The livestream viewer count was climbing rapidly as Blake positioned himself across the street with professional-grade camera equipment that would have impressed a film school graduate. Dana's phone showed the feed switching between the interior car camera, Blake's external angle, and a third camera that someone else in the neighborhood had apparently set up without us knowing about it. We've got over 1,000 people watching, Dana murmured, her eyes fixed on the screen as Chad began accelerating down our normally quiet residential street. This is either going to be very boring or very educational. It became clear within the first 30 seconds that Chad had confused confidence with competence. Instead of the easy cruise Dana had suggested, he immediately floored the gas pedal like he was trying to prove something to an invisible audience. The Corvette's voice system activated almost instantly. Easy there, Speed Racer. This ain't Mario Kart. Chad laughed and turned up the radio, apparently thinking the warning was some kind of joke. I glanced at Dana and saw something in her expression I'd never seen before, a flash of genuine anger mixed with what looked almost like personal pain. He drives exactly like his father used to, she murmured, her knuckles white as she gripped her phone. Same arrogance, same disregard for anyone else's safety, same assumption that rules don't apply to him. For just a moment, I saw past her careful planning to the hurt that had been driving this whole elaborate setup. The crash happened exactly where Dana had predicted it would. Chad took the lakeside curve too fast, overcorrected when the rear end started to slide, and ended up plowing straight into the community's prized botanical conservation area, a carefully maintained flower bed that featured rare plants imported at considerable expense from 3 different continents. The Corvette's automatic brake system engaged immediately, bringing the car to a stop before any serious damage could occur to either Chad or the vehicle. But the same couldn't be said for the $15,000 rare plant collection that was now scattered across the asphalt like very expensive confetti. What happened next was the kind of moment that defines viral content. As soon as the car stopped, every safety system Dana had installed activated simultaneously. Emergency flashers began strobing, the horn started blaring in a specific pattern that indicated a crash had been detected, and the voice system began delivering a series of increasingly sarcastic announcements. Crash detected. Maybe try a bicycle next time, followed by, unauthorized driver detected. Please exit and call your driving instructor. Chad, trapped in the driver's seat by a seatbelt he couldn't figure out how to release, and surrounded by flashing lights and blaring sounds, looked exactly like what he was, a teenager who was in way over his head. The entire 17-second sequence was captured from multiple angles, in high definition, and Blake's technical skills became immediately apparent as he began providing real-time, slow-motion analysis of exactly what had gone wrong. His commentary, which was being broadcast live to the growing audience, was both educational and merciless. Here we can see the driver entering the turn at approximately 45 miles per hour, which is about 20 miles per hour too fast for this particular curve radius. Notice how he's not adjusting his steering input to compensate for the increased speed. And watch what happens when the rear tires lose traction. The footage was devastating in its clarity. Within minutes, neighbors began emerging from their houses to see what all the commotion was about, and every single one of them had their phones out to record the spectacle of Chad Parker sitting in a crashed Corvette while safety systems announced his incompetence to the entire neighborhood. Mrs. Chen was the first to reach the scene, and I watched her barely suppress a smile as she asked Chad if he was hurt. "I'm fine," he mumbled, his earlier cockiness completely evaporated. It's not my fault, okay? Something's wrong with the steering or something." By the time the video finished uploading to various platforms, it had been viewed over 250,000 times, and the comment sections were absolutely brutal. "Kid has no business driving that beast," read one of the milder responses. "This is what happens when entitlement meets physics," said another. But the most damaging comments came from viewers who recognized the automotive expertise that had gone into setting up the car's safety systems and could explain in technical detail exactly what Chad had done wrong and why the crash was entirely preventable with proper driving skills. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for that same evening, which told me that Lawrence Parker had been monitoring the situation closely and was not pleased with how his son's joyride had turned out. When my phone rang an hour after the crash, Lawrence's voice was tight with controlled anger. "We need to talk about your little demonstration, Morrison," he said, and there was no pretense of neighborly politeness left in his tone. "That was a dangerous stunt, and there will be consequences." Dana took the phone from me and replied with perfect calm, "What demonstration, Mr. Parker? Your son asked to borrow our car and we agreed. If he can't handle a classic vehicle safely, perhaps he should stick to something more suitable for his skill level." The silence that followed was the sound of a man realizing he'd been outmaneuvered, and when he finally spoke again, his voice promised that this was far from over.